Dear viewers, welcome back to the analysis of Yoleno TV. Now, Professor MAKAU Mutua posted something on his Twitter handle, and this tweet that he posted forced me to do some research on what it entirely meant. So before we get further on our analysis, I would like to welcome you to Yoleno TV, and I hope you're well from wherever you're watching this channel. Now, Professor MAKAU Mutua said in his tweet that the king always slays the kingmaker. Think of Mzee Kenyatta and Odinga, Moi and Njonjo, Kibaki and Raila, Uhuru and Ruto. It's not Roque Sans who's next. Ladies and gentlemen, you by now know the history of Kenya very well. That most of the time, the person who is the deputy, the vice president, does not get immediate support from their boss. Probably, if you look at the case of, during Jaramogi and Kenyatta, you look at the case where there was Moi Kibaki back then, and then you look at the case where again there was Moi Saitoti. Then you come look at the case where there was Kibaki and Mudiawori, or you can link Kibaki and Raila. Then you come look at the case of Uhuru and Ruto. So the king always slays the kingmaker. I want us to understand some of those kings and kingmakers from the history from 1963 until 2002. So let's start by what Professor MAKAU Mutua said. Jaramogi and Jomo Kenyatta. You know the history of Jaramogi and Jomo Kenyatta and the detention of Jomo Kenyatta until those political campaigns that Jaramogi put to make sure that God, because he used to refer to Jomo Kenyatta as God, was released. So they were good friends back then, but you know the battle, what happened back then until they had to become friends turned enemies. And what led to the sudden, you remember there's a time when Jomo Kenyatta decided now to give the provincial administrations, provincial commissioners, they were given a lot of powers that resembled the powers of a vice president. So at that time, we almost had 8 vice presidents. I remember that history well. So that move was meant to make sure that Jaramogi was belittled and had no powers, and that could not claim second in command because the powers had been delegated. Some of those powers had been delegated to the. If I may take you back a bit to some of those reasons why the two fell out, is that Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Odinga joined hands to fight against British rule, but developed a fierce rivalry that after Kenya became independent in 1963. So a year after Pinto's death came the political liquidation of Jaramogi, who was then vice president of both the country and the ruling party, KANU. So the mastermind of the liquidation was Tom Mboya, the youthful political genius who was Kenyatta's sidekick. And the fallout of Jaramogi and Jomo was engineered by Cold War, triggered by the Cold War between the East and the West. The East and the West were fighting for these African countries, especially Kenya. So that fight triggered the Cold War, and that Cold War ensured that the differences between Jaramogi and Oginga was and Oginga Odinga was visible. Remember, Pio Gamapinto was one of the biggest, or one of the strategies of around Jaramogi Oginga Odinga's political campaign or political movement, and also he was a mastermind. But then you understand what happened and then the assassination and everything that is available in the public domain. But again, Jaramogi did not favor the kingmaker. He did not favor the kingmaker, and the kingmaker for this scenario, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Then came Charles Njonjo and Moi. So Charles Njonjo was again the right-hand man of Moi. What has it that all the designer suits they used to share tailors, they could share designers, they could share so many things. They were like brothers. But again, after the 1982 coup, that is the time the differences between Moi and Njonjo was beginning to be seen, because it is alleged that Moi had words from some sources that Njonjo was the mastermind of the coup. So that led to a growing differences between the two, between Njonjo and Moi, and it was not rosy going forward. But mind you, that time Njonjo was the AG. Then Njonjo made a terrible mistake when he attended a church and said, the flock cannot be led by a limping sheep to the grassland. That proverb, the Kikuyu proverb, irked Moi so much that even the parliament had to stop all the proceedings and discuss Njonjo's proverb. And it was revealed that that meant that the limping sheep was Moi, and Moi could not, lead Kenyans to the promised land. That the limping sheep could not lead the flock to the grassland. So that irked Moi so much, and the differences between the two was, if it was visible, and that is now the story behind the Charles, Njonjo, and Moi. Then came the Moi and Raila Amolo Odinga 1997 merger. Again, it was a case of a king and a kingmaker. When the parliament had almost decided that they were going to vote to move a vote of no confidence against Moi, Raila Amolo Odinga came to the aid of Moi, and that's now the time when the new KANU was formed. You remember the circumstances around the formation of the new KANU, and Moi hinted at supporting Raila Amolo Odinga when he retires. A thing that did not happen, because when Moi retired, was almost retiring, he decided to front Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and that is where now the differences again emerged between Moi and Raila Amolo Odinga, and that led to the mass exodus of some of those Moi diehards. Talk about Kalonzo, talk about Saitoti, and even Mudiaori. There are so many of them. Talk about Wamalwa, Kijana Wamalwa. Now that is where the story ended, the king and the kingmaker. Then came again Mwai Kibaki and Raila Amolo Odinga, king and the kingmaker. You know the story of Mwai Kibaki. Mwai Kibaki did not campaign for himself, but Raila Amolo did. It is just the same. It was just a repeat of Jaramogi and Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta. So in this case was Raila and Raila and Mwai Kibaki. And the accident, and Raila saying Kibaki Tosha and everything. The campaigns were being done when Kibaki was away. And then again, the kingmaker here was Raila. The king became Mwai Kibaki. And again, the same story happened of the king slaying the kingmaker. So Raila Amolo Odinga was again slain, and he didn't get the support that they had promised themselves, the one-time presidency, because Kibaki was to run for one term and then support Raila Amolo Odinga for the other term. But that did not happen. The king slayed the kingmaker. And then came the story of Uhuru and Ruto. And you know what happened? That is still available in the public domain. The king slayed the kingmaker. Uhuru did not support William Samoei Ruto. So William Samoei Ruto channeled his own path, but the king slayed the kingmaker, but the kingmaker decided to use his own ways to triumph, and is now the king. But again, in the arrangement of Ruto and Gachagua, you find that most of the votes that Ruto could have made Ruto win, despite the fact that most people do not think he won, were from Mount Kenya. Now, the person who was tasked with delivering the Mount Kenya block was Gachagua. So we can say the kingmaker here was Gachagua, but the king was Ruto. And that's why Ruto is not the president, or because of what Chebukati did, and the kingmaker is Gachagua. But now, the reason why Professor MAKAU Mutua posted that tweet is specific reference of now the king being Gachagua, the king being Ruto, and the kingmaker being Gachagua. Are we going to see a repeat of a king slaying a kingmaker? Or history will now be written that the king supported the kingmaker? So that is what Professor MAKAU Mutua has posted. But if history is anything to go by, then I think the king will slay the kingmaker. And I've said the kingmaker in this government is Gachagua. The king is William Samoei Ruto. Now, should the king decide not to support the kingmaker, because we have not seen the king supporting the kingmaker, we've not seen anywhere saying kumi kwangu kumi kwako, ama tano kwangu tano kwako. We haven't seen that. So that means there is no any kind of promise of that nature. So the king can decide to slay the kingmaker anytime they wish. There is nothing that is there as a debt. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think Professor MAKAU Mutua makes sense by his rhetoric, the king slaying the kingmaker? Kindly share what your thoughts are below the comment section there. But I think going forward, if my analysis are right, then I think Mount Kenya Mafia or the Mount Kenya bloc will not get another shot at the presidency, because the king will slay the kingmaker and give the presidency to another bloc. That is going to happen because most of these presidents would like to leave a good legacy, and one of the legacy is unifying the country. The king can decide to appoint to Musalia Mudavadi as his preferred successor. Should that happen, then the king would have slain the kingmaker, and the kingmaker will be left with nothing to do, because Mudavadi will have been the preferred successor. But that is just what I think. But that's not the exact picture of what will happen. We are not yet there, but that is something that is likely to happen. The king is likely to support someone else other than the kingmaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, please share what your thoughts are. But until we meet again, I'd like to urge you, first time viewer or any viewer who not subscribe to our channel, to please subscribe to Eleno TV. Keep supporting our channel. By supporting our channel, you're giving us morale to keep, getting more information to provide you for your consumption. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to wind up there, and until we meet again for another analysis, I'd like to urge you to stay safe and stay blessed.